From the words of a preacher to your heart, this is Hot Mic Episode 6. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. My apologies for missing my weekend uploads. I'm trying to keep some kind of schedule for this show, for Hot Mic. But it isn't always easy to sit down and record. This is ironic considering that many of the past episodes I've railed against apathy and not doing anything. I say that it's very easy to pick up a mic, record, put 15 minutes of audio out there, some kind of political commentary or spiritual commentary, but it isn't always easy. You look around and you see that the Christian right wing has largely disappeared off the internet, and this is multifaceted. I think a lot of this has to do with the censorship that we've been facing, and then the response that comes from it. They say that floundering pointlessly and not getting an audience or ears listening to what you're saying, or knowing that your word is getting out there, after long enough, a person will stop trying. And to a certain extent, that's true. I think it takes a certain personality to, time after getting shut out by the culture, continue to try. Now, if you search my account's name, you'll see that it is scrubbed out of a lot of Google results off of YouTube, or it's hidden. And my comment section in every single one of my videos is largely censored. Whether or not it's because your accounts of you, my listeners, trying to comment are unable to do so because you're flagged, or because my channel personally is flagged. Censorship is very rife on this side. When you look left and you look right, where there used to be many people on the Christian right wing speaking, putting words out there, letting everybody know that we're all in this together, now there's simply silence. When you see that your channel is censored, when you see that your words are censored, and then when you see that even your friends themselves are censored, you are overcome with a sense of vanity. What I just read from was the first couple lines of the book of Ecclesiastes, and something interesting. In Russian, vanity, vanity, all is vanity. I believe in Russian it's sueta, suet, visyo suetum. It's not vanity. The word is futility. Futility of futilities. And sometimes that's what it feels like. We go out here, we put words to the microphone, we speak our minds, we speak, or at least try to, the word of Christ out into the public that they can listen. But it feels futile, both because what is one man going to do to an entire culture, and also because even if I sit down and record, nothing's actually going to be heard. It's going to be censored. I think it's important to remember where the origins of Christianity came from. From 12 men who, for all intents and purposes, weren't geniuses and scholars. There was really only one apostle, and he wasn't even one of the original 12 who you could consider a scholar. And I've even heard it said that this particular man, Paul, who was a rhetorician by trade, was a tent maker. And yet, even though this was the case, from 12, this religion, Christianity, the truth, managed to reach all corners of the earth. If there's one thing for sure, it is if you don't speak, if you do nothing at all, nothing will change. But maybe, just maybe, if my voice reaches 20 or 30 people, and 7 decide to listen to the end, maybe they will get the feeling that they're not alone. That even though you look around and you see the culture descending into a cesspit, perhaps worse in some ways than Sodom and Gomorrah, there are some out there who still thirst for righteousness' sake. And so I hope, as I continue to record these episodes of Hot Mic, you are inspired in some way to continue trying, that it's not futile, that we're not engaged in the futility of futilities. I'm going to talk about demoralization later in the episode, but I wanted to start off by talking about something else. The first topic I wanted to cover is something called linguistic determinism. The way in which you use your words the way that words are used in politics, the way that words are used in religion. They're not benign. That is to say, it matters the way you speak, and it matters what definitions words have. If you can control a word and how it's spoken, you can control how a word is used in someone's mind. Essentially, you can control the course of thought simply by controlling words and their definitions. I'd say that linguistic determinism in our culture right now has a very close tie with the slippery slope. The slippery slope, listen, I know we're covering years-old topics, but hold on with me, will you? The slippery slope, as we know, is not a fallacy, it's an inevitability. We went from 2015, get married, and that's all we want to do, to children's sexuality. Children's sexuality. We live in a very schizophrenic culture where a majority, or at least a plurality, I'm not even that confident in that anymore. I'll say a plurality of people in the United States still see pedophilia as the ultimate evil that a person can act in. It is the unspeakable. You can talk about murder and say, well, the person did this, they were motivated by that. With pedophilia, it is the third rail for a plurality of Americans. I don't want to say majority anymore. And yet, despite this, despite people being able to say that they would kill a pedophile if it came down to it, that they would happily do so, that the cure for pedophilia is a 45 ACP. The culture feels so strongly about this, and yet we're now having the words children's sexuality thrown and bandied about in schools, even churches, on the news, all over YouTube, social media, so on and so forth. The Gay Straight Alliance clubs and other sodomite activities place themselves in schools, grade schools. There's only 1 year in the entirety of grade school where children are no longer children, they're legally viewed as an adult. That is the senior year of high school. And even then, at least half the year, they are still children. These clubs that have everything to do only exclusively with sexuality are in the places where there are children. These activities are happening in elementary schools and middle schools, as well as high schools. Despite the fact that pedophilia is a third rail with a plurality of Americans, they don't speak out against these clubs existing in the schools. They don't speak out about Drag Queen Story Hour in any meaningful sense. It's schizophrenic. But because of linguistic determinism, because in the culture they've said that sexuality and gender, which there is no such thing, there's only sex, but because sexuality and gender are two separate things, it can apply to children and we can't get rid of their identity. Now, this identity, which has everything to do only with how you view the opposite sex or the same sex, is removed from this concept. These people who openly talk about shooting pedophiles don't do anything when these people are creating clubs exclusively designed on the concept of sodomy for children. This brings me now to something written by some, I believe, transsexual, some tranny, ContraPoints. Maybe some of you have heard of this guy. Quote, "Random drag queens in public pose zero threat to children. These people don't care about protecting children. They care about protecting, quote, childhood innocence, unquote. Ignorance romanticized. A bullshit fantasy made up by adults reflecting every adult prejudice. Linguistic determinism. Childhood innocence is not the protection of children. Protecting childhood innocence and children are not the same. This is where the argument is going. Or rather, I'd actually say that the argument is already there, considering that 50% of this country divorces and children grow up in broken homes. That they have Drag Queen Story Hour, that they have the Gay BC's bullshit books in Target or whatever. I'd say the argument's already there. So let's follow the argument. If protecting children is not protecting their innocence, which according to these people, childhood innocence doesn't exist, the ignorance, let's just say, that children have to the absolute depravity of the world and the sodomites that live in it, or even quote-unquote normal people that live in it, that if you were to ruin this, you're not hurting the child or harming the child in any conceivable way. Where does this end? Where does that take you? Where does that line of logic conclude in? I suppose they would argue that if you molested a child and followed the conclusions of Alfred Kinsey, they don't have any innocence to ruin, and you're not really harming the child, right? Because the child's not leaving with a broken arm. That's where it ends. You're going to have a bunch of walk-in molestation victims. Depravity doesn't have an end. It's a bottomless pit. I've heard it said before that these people can rationalize everything, and of course, because the common culture, the zeitgeist that they have is no different than these sodomites, hence why we're so far down the same rail. Where does it end? It's only childhood innocence. If you lose that, it's not like you have a broken arm. And then if you had a broken arm, they'd say, well, you have a broken arm, at least you're not dead. It never ends. The right wing has said it has to get bad enough before people do something, before they stand up and do something. At a certain point, I start to wonder whether or not we're looking at a case of the frog boiling very slowly and people getting used to the Overton window being pushed over, or if they just have something in common with this mentality. It should be the case that it doesn't matter how far or how slowly the Overton window shifts. There are certain things that are non-negotiables. You'd expect that at least. No matter how slow, how determined the culture moves to evil, you'd expect that the average person would not want to get their arm chopped off. They always know that that's an evil. So I consider that having a child and having this done to other children, when you have a child you can empathize with, the situation. You start to wonder if it's just that the average person is a fucking abuse victim, like Gen X, Gen Z, millennials, grow up in broken homes. If because they themselves don't have maybe normal childhood innocence or grew up with it, that they don't see anything wrong with this. How much further do we really need to go? It's not like when they actually make this pedophilia legalized, and it is an eventuality in our culture. We're following the same exact trends that Weimar did, and we live in a capitalist hell where everything's a commodity to be bought and sold. Nothing is sacred. Everything is transactional. So it is an inevitability. What is it that will change when the law is actually made to reflect the culture? We already have had years of trans drag children. We have mainstream TV shows like that fucking freak Jazz Jennings. And you look at these pride parades, I can already think of a couple. You see kids watching this stuff happen, not only, but you see kids participating in it. Just down the road, you got people pissing on each other, or some guy having his dick held out the window. You read on Zombie Time about the Folsom Street Fair, you hear about these sodomites sitting on the steps of elementary schools during these parades. And you wonder, how much further can the culture go? And what's wrong with the average person that they don't say enough is enough? Why do they still look for permission? I think that the average conservative, it's not that they need permission to get up and do something like they've been threatening forever to do. I think that they are actual cowards that wouldn't do it in the first place because they don't know what pain is. But the men and women who have some semblance of their soul still intact, when they're going to be waiting for permission forever. I'm not calling to violence. I'm simply saying that it's interesting that we're descending into Sodom and Gomorrah and no one feels the need to do anything. They're watching it happen from their TV screens. On the heels of what we just talked about, I'm actually going to read this next article here I've been saving. From May 26, 2022. Biden's USDA. Schools must embrace transgender agenda or be deprived of food funds. The Biden administration announced in May that K-12 schools must allow boys into girls' bathrooms in order to qualify for federal funds used to pay for school lunches. The move, which was made by U.S. Department of Agriculture, Food and Nutrition Services, was made based on the interpretation of the prohibition on discrimination based on sex, as detailed in Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, as well as the Food and Nutrition Act of 2008. Unless schools allow transgender identifying students to enter the bathrooms of their choosing, schools will be cut off entirely from federal funds and be unable to pay for food served in the cafeteria. I want you to follow the logic here. Your genitals have nothing to do with your gender, and your gender has nothing to do with sexuality. So, let's see. Your genitals also have nothing to do with your sexuality. And children are able to subscribe to this and come in, and unless the school, which deals exclusively with children, takes in this ideology that has to do with the sexuality now of children, the supposed sexuality of children, they will be cut off from federal funds for food. Either you let me molest your children, or you starve. This is the message coming out of the federal government. And yet, what are parents doing? I didn't see any protests for this. And even if they did protest, what does it accomplish? The mainstream conservative right has done a couple protests. It's never done anything, and they haven't learned their lesson. Or maybe they did. They learned that protesting doesn't do them any good, so they'll just stay home and eat chips instead. I don't think, then, that pedophilia is the third rail that people make it out to be, that they pretend it to be. What is, then, the third rail? That's for another time, I suppose. Left or right, at least from within the system, it doesn't matter. I'm going to remind you that under Donald Trump, the same tactics were used in an attempt to decriminalize sodomy worldwide. Under Trump, they were trying to get various African countries with homosexuality laws to repeal these laws under threat of deprivation of food, water, and medication funds. Not that I believe that African nations should be getting aid from the United States and we should be sending our money over there, but look at what it's being threatened over. We're not threatening them to end slavery in their countries. We're not threatening them to end machete fights in the streets. We're threatening that if they don't stop their sodomy laws, that we're going to not give them food. With the left and the right, it's the same destination, and now you're getting there by the same means. It used to be that with the left versus the right, one was a slow decline and the other was, we'll do it here and now. But the speed is now much the same. Seems to be a running theme that from every direction you look, whether it's now schools poisoning the minds of children, parents not giving a shit that this is happening and sending their kids to public school anyway. When we have mass shootings, we have cops not doing their job and letting kids get slaughtered. It seems to be that we're determined to do everything possible to destroy our next generation of children. What do you have if you don't have a next generation of children? You have nothing. You die and that's the end of you. So because even in the public school, when these children are being taught about sodomy, that their teachers are sodomites, because of all of this, we've established that there is no third rail with the average person. There is no Alamo for them, a line that won't be crossed. So if you have no standards, how long is it until we have the sodomite standard imposed on us? I'm going to read you something from the 1972 Gay Rights Charter. This was one of the original homosexual quote-unquote rights platforms made in Chicago in a convention held in 1972 at the National Coalition of Gay Organizations. The funny thing is, you read off of this list and it reads like a checklist. For a while, these homosexual advocates and homophile leagues tried to distance themselves a little bit from the NAMBLA, the National American Boy Love Association, literally just a pederast group, out and out. It never really was too successful because there was so much overlap between the prominent figures and even the people inside of it. For example, like Stephen Donaldson was a pedophile, Harvey Milk was a pedophile, Allen Ginsberg was a part of NAMBLA, so on and so forth. But back then, in 1972, there was no qualms made about it. The average person understood that a sodomite was so sick there was no difference. So the sodomites didn't even feel the need to distance themselves from this other sector that's a part of their coalition, which is pederasts. But now, years after the fact, after this convention was made and this platform was created, this reads almost like a checklist. Let's go to the state level for them. and we'll talk about whether or not these things have actually been done. And I'm going to stop at the most important one, at least in this episode of Hot Mic that we're discussing. Repeal of all state laws prohibiting private sexual acts involving consenting persons, equalization for homosexuals and heterosexuals for the enforcement of all laws. It's been done. Repeal all state laws prohibiting solicitation for private voluntary sexual liaisons, laws prohibiting prostitution, both male and female. In many aspects, this is done. We don't have to make a comparison between prostitution and pornography. It's the same thing. But this is regarding, I believe, cottaging. Homosexuals meeting in public bathrooms, public toilets where they make their love. That's already happened. These laws are not enforced. Enactment of legislation prohibiting insurance companies or other state-regulated enterprises from discriminating because of sexual orientation, already there. Enactment of legislation so that child custody, adoption, visitation rights, foster parenting, and the like shall not be denied because of sexual orientation or marital status. That's been done. We have sodomites adopting kids, we have single mothers getting in vitro and egg fertilization, and we've had many kids molested because of it. Repeal of all laws prohibiting transvestitism and cross-dressing. So that's been done not only to the extent that it's no longer against the law, but you have homosexuals dressing as women and having children dress as women and doing drag queen story hour where they teach kids how to twerk and how to sodomize each other. This is now a tenet of the state religion. Now, number 7. Repeal of all laws governing the age of sexual consent. I'm going to bring up that tweet from ContraPoints again. These people don't care about protecting children. They care about protecting childhood innocence. Ignorance romanticized, a bullshit fantasy made up by adults reflecting every adult prejudice. If sex doesn't negatively impact children because you're not removing some innocence that they have, what's the point of an age of consent law? What's preventing us then from descending into the Weimar Republic where you can walk into a bar because everything's transactional, because nothing is sacred, because nothing has some super material meaning to it, that you walk into a bar and have a child sit on your lap for a fee? If you remove the soul, if you remove God, and everything is just simply it is, everything is nihilistic, nothing has meaning, what's preventing you from doing that? It's not like the child's having a black eye or a broken arm, right? This is the rationalization. And if you deny children their sexual orientation or their sexual gender identification, your schools don't get food funds. In the same vein, I have yet another article. Cops probe after middle school librarian allegedly says students are sex workers to justify pro-prostitution book. May 28, 2022. I spoke earlier about linguistic determination. How many times have we heard the phrase sex worker? What is it? It's another way of saying prostitute or whore without the connotation of what it is. Using abuse victims. Reducing a human body and a human soul into nothing more than a piece of meat, a commodity to be bought and sold. The book in the library said, a person may exchange sex or sexual activities for things they need or want, such as food, housing, hormones, drugs, gifts, or other resources. That read from one of the passages. Prostitution is like being a store clerk, an architect, or a freelance writer. We all unfortunately have to do work to make a living, and some of us hate our jobs and some of us love them. Same goes for those who do sex work. Sadly, sex work is generally misunderstood. The librarian who defended this book said that many kids come to the library who do sex work, and this makes them feel validated. Left, right, and center, everywhere you look, you have the sexualization of children in public places, parents doing nothing more than doing an impotent protest or some bullshit at a PTA meeting where they're going to be labeled as terrorists by the FBI anyway. It's not the third rail. It's not where they say enough and force the hand of those who are doing this to stop it. You've got children who are working as prostitutes, according to this librarian, and people who hold these ideas are in prominent positions in every day. They're not rare ideas anymore. They're not taboo. They're not forbidden from being spoken about. So how much longer will it be before Part 7 of the state-level law set on the gay party platform in 1972 is finally enacted? Nearly everything else on that platform has been done. So how much longer is it going to be before we get there? And how much longer is it before you say enough? Which brings me to my next point, demoralization. We look around in our culture and we see other white people engaging in the worst pathologies known to man. We say on the right that white people as a collective seem to be suicidal. But I had a thought. Are you suicidal? Am I suicidal? Are we the ones aborting babies, and are we the ones forcing children to put condoms on bananas? No. Was Lot a we with the sodomites? Are we, as white people, collectively suicidal? If we consider these people to be part of our tribe, the answer is yes. We need to start putting up walls between what we consider white and good and white as the greater sense of the whole. If we expect God to separate the wheat from the chaff, we can't see ourselves as fellow citizens with them. If we group ourselves with them, God will not separate the wheat from the chaff. Lot did not see himself as we with the sodomites. And the minute he stopped grouping himself with them, that entire place got nuked to high hell. And to this day, it's the only place on earth you can find pure chunks of sulfur on the surface of the earth. We cannot be fighting for white people as a whole when we include these people in the whole we're fighting for. We just can't. We have to see ourselves as the sojourners in a foreign land. We are foreigners. This land is not our land anymore. It's not Christian, and it's not even white. In both ways. In both the population, non-Hispanic whites are already a minority and have been for years. Not just saying that Gen Z or Gen Alpha, the newest generation, are a minority. Non-Hispanic whites are a minority. This is not our country, and you look at the government is not ran by white Christians. It's not even ran by white people. It's ran by foreigners known as Jews. This is not our country. We need to see ourselves as different than these white people who are putting their children on the slab to sacrifice them to Moloch. The minute we start separating ourselves from them, and still at the same time caring about our own tribe, that's the minute we could start separating the wheat from the chaff. That's the minute that the chaff can start burning up. If white people as a whole are a human body, the entire tribe, the entire race is considered one person. If you have a gangrenous hand, you have to cut it off or it will kill the rest of the body. If we have two hands that are gangrenous, they have to come off. We have to cut away the poison until we're left with something good and go from there. It's better to go into heaven with one hand than to have two hands and be thrown into hell, which is what every day this world is starting to look more like in the Western world. I'm not saying give up on the white race. I'm saying the exact opposite. If you go to someone and you can see and you can tell that they're infected, shake the dust off your sandals and move on. The people of your tribe who have their shit together, who are capable of hearing things, work with them. Network with them. They will be the white people tomorrow rebuilding things from the ashes if we survive this hell we find ourselves in. That concludes our content for this week. I'm going to encourage anybody from the old days of the Christian right wing, when it was still in full force, to continue making content, to take 5-10 minutes out of your day, try to make something, put it out there, let everybody know that we're all still together, we're not just atomized, we're not living in CIA glow nigger hell alone, okay? I'm going to ask that you try to comment on videos, not just mine. Go to Horrified Onlooker, go to Make a Horror Show, I know she's still making content too. Comment on our stuff. Interact with each other. We can't be atomized. We have to be together in this. There's about a 2% chance that this is going to be heard by these guys, but Rick from Rome is Burning, Orc Brand, if you guys are still around, get back to making podcasts, get back to making shows. Your stuff was good. Keep doing it. And in the off case that this channel gets banned, which is a possibility, you can find me on Vidly, at Tales from Weimerica. The website is VIDLII Vidly. It's a clone of the old YouTube, It's a site that's like YouTube with the layout from 2006 to 2009, I'd say. It's pretty decent. If I get banned here, you can find me there, or you can find me on Gab. I'm just plugging this in case I get banned, which is a possibility. And one last thing, if there's any listeners listening this far in, I want to personally invite you to check out our Discord group. We're looking for new players. We do Arma games, Steam games, and we run a tabletop RPG. It's a lot of fun. We'd love to have you. This has been Tales from Weimerica's Hot Mic, Episode 6. I'll see you guys later. Hail Christ and hail victory.